the Indian consumer and the evolution that we've seen. As someone who has her finger on the pulse of hundreds of millions, not just in India, but across the region, who is the Indian consumer of today? Is it defined by Gen Z, the social media warriors, or is it those who are not on social media but have the actual money to be real spenders?
Firstly, thank you very much for having me over here. It's always wonderful to be at your events, so thank you. So today's consumer, when we are talking about, I think, firstly today, a large part of the consumer actually is truly global because of, dissolving boundaries because of social and internet first world and a data first world, right? So if you look at the consumers today, large part of them, I mean, most of the brands are targeting consumers, which are like the Gen Zs and not to forget the millennials. The key difference between the consumers today, whether it is in India or whether globally, as compared to, say, consumers about 2 decades back, is that these consumers, when we talk about the Gen Zs or the millennials of the world, these consumers are largely digital natives. What I mean by that, now digital native again is a term which is like very often used by a lot of people, but what it really means is that these people actually have grown in an era, right from the childhood or early young adulthood. They have lived in an era where Web 2.0 was all around them, which means they were living in the social world already. And so they are, a large part of their learning and the way they have sort of their behavior has shaped is on the back of the fact that they just get up, go into some platform or the other, whether they are doing banking activity, whether they are doing like maps as to where to go, whether they are sort of just doing social entertainment, whatever. Everywhere they are used to being known as people because every platform speaks to you as a person, So they are used to being treated like that. Everything should come to them with a click of a button and things like that. And more recently, of course, the same consumer is also shaping further with the advent of AI and now more, recently generative AI. So now even those sort of consumer behaviors are changing. We see very, very fast. Just like, at some point in time, the keyboards got replaced by touch and swipe because the smartphones had come. Now that touch and swipe we are seeing, they are being changed to sort of voice prompts and, prompting in general and many other ways. It's changing a lot.
So does that make the Indian consumer of today and tomorrow that much harder to decode, because we are seeing AI summaries impact web traffic, for instance, and those of who you follow that, the drop is like 30, 40, 50%, 60% in some cases. Is that making the task of people like you much more harder?
I won't say it is making it harder. I think we just need to adapt, just like the consumer is adapting. So consumers adapt very fast. I think organizations need to adapt, and people like us also need to adapt pretty fast. So there are 2-3 aspects to that. So when we say that consumers today are largely digital natives and their behaviors are shaping really fast, what it means for advertisers, marketers, brand builders essentially is that in the past what used to happen, it was a very top-down narrative. We were used to giving a very top-down narrative. So we will create a narrative and it will easily reach 80% of the people and your job is done. But it is no longer today. Like every person's reality is very different depending on what are the feeds that they're following and what is the, what is the life they're living in their sort of social networks. So we need to be, a lot of the communication actually is being co-created with the consumers. We've seen the rise of the influencers. So how it changes our task is that as brand builders, as marketers, we need to ensure that we are also talking to them at the speed of culture, at the speed of social. A lot of sort of individualized, personalized communication, because that's what they're used to. They are used to being, they believe that when somebody's serving them some communication, they should know who they're talking to. That's how they've shaped. So which means that we need to create content and engage with them in a manner which they are used to, and in a manner which sort of really holds their interest, attracts their interest, and obviously, hopefully make them take some action.
You've spoken about the advertiser's perspective. The India Today Group is marking its 50th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And we are here at the National Stock Exchange. So I have to ask you this. Thank you very much. I have to ask you this question from the perspective of a publisher, a couple really. So while advertising is growing, what we are seeing is that big tech and sort of non-transparent algorithms are sucking away that advertising. And content strategies are therefore also, especially in the digital world, following that. But what about traditional publishers who put in sweat and blood, hundreds and thousands of people who want to create good content, not top-down really, but credible content? How do they adapt to the shift? What would you say as one of the biggest names in the advertising fraternity?
So I think it's been spoken about before as well. I think content is still king. And how you reach the consumer is what is really changing. Just like I gave an example of how marketers or brand builders have to change their tactics to reach the consumers, and the old way is not working. Similarly, content creators, news creators, they need to change the way they are reaching the consumers. And, just sticking to a format possibly is not going to work. Now, interestingly, I want to quote a study here. Like last year, we'd done a study on Gen Z. Obviously, everybody wants to decode them, so we did our own bit on the Gen Z decoding.
And can I interject? We are going to soon come out with a Gen Z survey. I'll leave it for then. Go ahead, please.
Right. So one of the very interesting things that came out from that, and it really took me by surprise. I'm of course of that vintage where I believe that, I believe that news titles, the credibility of news and everything is dependent on the titles. And, we don't believe any news which is coming here and there and whatever. And I thought that is how the world would be. And that is how, very surprisingly, what came out in the Gen Z report is that the first port of call for news, okay, there are no surprises there, is the social feeds. But it is not only their first port of call, it is also what they trust. So I digged a bit deeper in that as to why is it so. And what came out over there really is that the reason they trust that a lot is because they believe that, firstly, it's open to the world. They sort of go through the whole sort of whatever is the news. And then they possibly, spend same amount of time, even all the comments which are there below. And so they make their own sort of impressions basis those comments as well. A lot of them believe that news which is being served to them on platform or on known titles or known could very well be influenced either by business or by economics or by politics or by various sort of interests. And hence they believe that if they are reading it in an open platform where people are free to comment, they go through the comments and make their own opinions. So, basically, we will have to keep a pulse on the, finger on the pulse of the consumer and figure a way to crack that.
Our group is present across possibly every segment of the media industry. But I want to ask you a question. You said social first Gen Z.
Yes.
What, according to you, is the mix from a media buyer's point of view between print, television, linear television, digital, and then the subset of social? Because within the social, the big tech dominated areas, I don't know, is data the savior or is there something else that you would want to tell us?
That's an excellent question. So, there was a time when we used to talk about this whole, like, how much is TV, how much is digital, and how much is print, and how much is... Those days are gone. What I mean by that, essentially, is that everything is being served on digital platforms eventually. Just like you said that as
we have the YouTube MD
yes.
Of India right here. So.
Yes. I'm not quoting any figures, okay? So the thing is that all content, whether what we used to, traditionally call as TV or what we now used to call as print, and it's available on all kind of platforms. It's available on digital, it's available, and people consume it over there. So, okay, first from the marketer's perspective, because we handle a lot of hundreds of clients, if you look at, there has been a clear shift in the last 5 years where more and more budgets are going from the more traditional sort of advertising to digital. That being said, digital is also like a sea, okay? Digital is not just digital. Digital means a lot of things. And so people are doing search, social, travel, banking or everything on digital. What I mean by, so today we are living in an age where it has become extremely important, and the signals of people on digital are not that easy to track. And then we have walled gardens, which have their own sort of data sets. And for advertisers and marketers, and I can speak from their end, it's very difficult to track individuals on different platforms, deduplicate and all of that. So there's a lot of investment firms like ours do in ensuring that we have understanding of first-party data or actual consumers at some level. And the whole sort of world in this area is shifting more towards that, whereas you have an understanding on the data and you are able to serve sort of personalized messages at the speed of culture, at the speed of social and all of that. So,
given what you said, I wonder, does digital advertising deliver value vis-a-vis the so-called traditional formats?
That depends on what exactly is it. So for example, if on digital you're just like, we've seen all kinds of ads. So on digital, if you're seeing like you're reading some article, you're very engaged in some content and suddenly there are all these banners popping up, I doubt anybody really pays any attention. And the skip rate of that is extremely high. Right. That being said, but suppose I'll give you an example of the influencers, for example. Right. You are scrolling through how you are scrolling through reels and through sort of shorts and all of that. And I don't know about you, but because each reel is different, on my reel I get a lot of ads. Every third, fourth thing is an ad. Okay. And there are lots of them that I engage with because they just catch my attention and I want to know more about it. And obviously they are my interest. They're serving me my interest, what I'm interested in. So like I'm interested in fitness. So I see a lot of fitness apps or fitness ads coming over there, or apparels and whatever. So it depends on the context and less in terms of what is the format. And similarly, I must say that in a lot of places, it's not like it's the end of all the other formats, okay? A lot of market mix modeling studies that we do, clearly what comes out over there is that, print has its own place, the credibility which is there depending on which audience you are sort of targeting. Similarly, out of home has a lot of place. There is a lot of digital out of home. There we are seeing a surge in print recent times. All the reports that I'm reading, there's some sort of a surge on print side as well, and similarly on television.
Okay, a couple of minutes left, so I'll try and get two more questions in one. Continuing with this, try and look down the road a decade. What will be the shape of the Indian media landscape according to you? That's easy.
So one of the things that I wanted to land over here, India is as a market, when I talked about all of these digital natives and, one of the interesting things for us to know is that even somewhere when I was talking, it was already 52% of our audiences are already Gen Z and millennials, okay, in India, because it's a young nation. So you can imagine the impact that these consumers are having on everything around them, whatever they're consuming and all of that. The other interesting part is, again, I read this recently when I had to present somewhere. India is the largest market of ChatGPT, okay, 13.5% or something like that. It has crossed the US. That is the rate of adoption because of the Gen Z and the millennials and their ease with technology. So it's the largest market, even across the US, even though these are all new things. So the digital leap of India is unmatched. It's unmatched, and I heard in some of the earlier conversations also, a lot of people spoke about that. That being said, one of the key things that we see is that the digital leap of India is possibly way ahead of its economic leap. What I mean by that is the ability for anybody to buy in bit size, bite size and whatever is much lower than a lot of other economies. So it is one of the most difficult. If you then add to it the complexity of the languages, regions, whatever, and then there are, of course, there are people who will behave like they are in Seoul and they are like the K generation and all of that. Then there are people which is largely like, more mid-tier, rooted in cultural sort of, values and all of that. So there are many complexities which come into that. So one has to also be cognizant of that. So 10 years from now, I guess that 52% would have moved to, I don't know, I'm not an economist, but 62, 72%. So this will be the, way of the world at that point in time.
Okay, time's up. And I'm going to thank you at this stage, Anupriya. Hundreds, if not thousands of companies rely on her advice for their media strategy, and she's one of the best in the business, one of the most powerful women in business. Thank you very much for your time with us.
Thank you very
today.
much for having me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Huge round of applause. May I please request you to stay back as we click our photo.